The morning sunlight used to be the most beautiful part of Margaret Wilson's day. Every morning at exactly 6:30, she would walk outside with a small cup of coffee in her trembling hands and sit beside the garden she had spent more than 30 years creating. To everyone else, it was just flowers, plants, and a few old wooden decorations. But to Margaret, it was something much more. It was the last place where she still felt connected to the life she once had. Her husband, Robert, had planted the first rose bush there on the day they bought the house. He always told her, "One day this garden will outlive us. It will remind people that we were here." After Robert passed away, that garden became Margaret's reason to wake up every morning. She watered every flower herself. She trimmed every branch carefully. She even talked to the plants like they were old friends. The neighbors in Willow Creek estates knew Margaret as the garden lady. Children walking home from school would stop just to look at the colorful flowers growing around her house. But one person hated that garden more than anyone else. Her name was Karen Whitmore, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. For years, Karen had controlled everything in the neighborhood. The color of people's houses, the type of decorations they could put outside, the cars they could park in their own driveways, even the height of their grass. Karen believed the neighborhood belonged to her. Not the residents, not the homeowners. Her. And Margaret's garden had always bothered her. "Your garden looks messy," Karen said one afternoon while standing outside Margaret's fence. Margaret looked surprised. "Messy? I take care of every flower myself." Karen crossed her arms. "That's not the point. The HOA rules clearly state that landscaping must maintain a certain appearance." Margaret smiled politely. "I have lived here for 32 years, Karen. Nobody ever complained before." Karen's expression changed. "That's because nobody was willing to enforce the rules." Margaret looked at her carefully. "Are you saying you want me to remove my garden?" Karen smiled. "I'm saying you should prepare yourself." Margaret didn't understand what she meant. But 3 days later she found out. At 7:15 in the morning, Margaret heard a loud noise outside her house. A deep mechanical sound, like something heavy crushing the ground. Confused, she walked toward her front window and froze. A bulldozer was sitting in front of her garden. Her flowers, her roses, her memories, all about to disappear. Margaret rushed outside. "Stop, what are you doing?" The construction worker looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We have instructions to clear this area." "Instructions from who?" Before the worker could answer, Karen stepped forward. "I authorized it." Margaret stared at her. "You destroyed my garden." Karen looked completely calm. It was an unauthorized structure, violating HOA landscaping regulations. Margaret's hands started shaking. "Unauthorized. This garden has been here for decades." Karen pulled out a folder. "We sent you multiple violation notices." Margaret grabbed the papers. "I never received anything." Karen smiled. "Maybe you should check your mailbox more often." Something about the way she said it felt wrong. But before Margaret could argue, the bulldozer started moving. The first rose bush fell. Margaret screamed. "No!" She ran forward, but the worker stopped her. "Ma'am, please move back." She watched helplessly as the garden disappeared. 30 years of memories. 30 years of love. Destroyed in less than 20 minutes. Karen stood there watching. Not angry. Not sad. Almost satisfied. And that was the moment Margaret realized something. This was never about flowers. Karen wanted something else. That night, Margaret sat alone in her silent backyard. The empty dirt looked like a wound. She held one small broken rose branch in her hand. Her husband's favorite rose. Tears rolled down her face. "I'm sorry, Robert. I couldn't protect it." For the first time since her husband died, Margaret felt completely powerless. But she didn't know something important. Someone else had been watching. Someone who was about to uncover the truth. Her grandson, Daniel. Daniel arrived the next morning after Margaret called him. The moment he saw the destroyed garden, his expression changed. "Grandma, who did this?" Margaret looked away. "The HOA." Daniel frowned. "The HOA destroyed your garden." She nodded. "Karen said it violated rules." Daniel walked around the empty space. He noticed something strange. "Grandma, where are the violation notices?" Margaret handed him the papers Karen gave her. Daniel looked through them. His eyebrows slowly moved closer. "These dates are impossible." "What do you mean?" Daniel pointed at the documents. "This notice says it was delivered 6 months ago." "Yes. But Grandma, you were in the hospital 6 months ago." Margaret looked confused. So you weren't even living here." Silence filled the room. Daniel looked again. Then he noticed something else. "The signatures are wrong." Margaret looked at him. "What?" "This says you signed for receiving these notices." She shook her head. "I never signed anything." Daniel stared at the papers. Someone had forged her signature. And suddenly, this stopped being a garden dispute. It became something much bigger. That evening, Daniel started searching through HOA documents. At first, he expected to find a simple mistake. Maybe Karen had made an error. Maybe someone had filed the wrong paperwork. But after hours of research, he discovered something disturbing. The Willow Creek HOA had changed contractors 3 times in the last 2 years. Every contract was approved by Karen. Every payment went through companies nobody in the neighborhood had heard of. Daniel opened one financial record. Then another. Then another. His face became serious. "Grandma." Margaret looked up. "What did you find?" Daniel turned the laptop toward her. "Karen didn't destroy your garden because of HOA rules." "Then why?" Daniel pointed at the documents. "She destroyed it because she wanted the land." Margaret stared at the screen. "What?" Daniel continued. "The HOA paid a company to redesign this area." "That's normal." "No." He zoomed in. "The company belongs to someone connected to Karen." Margaret felt her heart sink. "She planned this." Daniel nodded. "She wanted your garden removed because she needed this space for a project." "What project?" Daniel looked at another document. "A private development plan. A luxury community expansion." And on the map, Margaret's house was marked. Her garden was marked. Her entire property was marked. Daniel whispered, "Grandma, she isn't just trying to control your garden. She's trying to take your home." Margaret looked toward the window where her garden used to be. For years, she thought Karen was just a difficult neighbor. But now she understood. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was using them as a weapon. And the worst part, Karen wasn't afraid. Because she believed nobody would ever challenge her. The next morning, Karen arrived at Margaret's house. She came with 2 HOA board members. Margaret opened the door. "What do you want?" Karen smiled. "I heard your grandson is asking questions." Daniel stepped forward. "Is that a problem?" Karen looked at him. Your grandmother is elderly. She doesn't need unnecessary stress. Daniel laughed. Interesting, because destroying her garden didn't seem to worry you. Karen's smile disappeared. Be careful, Daniel. Is that a threat? No. She stepped closer. It's advice. Daniel looked directly at her. Advice from someone who forged documents. For the first time, Karen looked nervous. Only for a second. But Daniel noticed. Karen quickly recovered. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then she looked at Margaret. If you continue causing problems, the HOA may have to take further action. Margaret's voice was quiet. What more can you take from me? Karen smiled. You'd be surprised. She walked away. But she made one mistake. She underestimated Daniel. Because Daniel wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking for proof. And he was about to find something that would destroy Karen's entire empire. Something hidden inside the HOA records that nobody had ever discovered. A secret account. A missing $1 million. And a signature that would reveal exactly who Karen Whitmore really was. Daniel spent the entire night going through every document he could find. The more he searched, the worse it became. The Willow Creek HOA wasn't just poorly managed. It was being controlled like a private business. A business designed to make money from the people who trusted it. Daniel opened years of financial reports. At first, everything looked normal. Maintenance fees, repair costs, community expenses. But then he noticed something strange. Every few months, thousands of dollars were transferred to companies with names nobody recognized. Companies that existed only on paper. No offices. No employees. No real projects. Just money disappearing. Daniel wrote down every company name. Then he searched the ownership records. His eyes widened. Every single company had one thing in common. They were connected to Karen Whitmore. Some were registered under her relatives. Some were registered under old friends. And one company was registered under Karen's own name before she became HOA president. Daniel leaned back in his chair. This isn't corruption. This is a system. He continued digging. Then he found something even bigger. A file labeled Community Improvement Proposal. Inside was a plan for a luxury garden expansion project. The documents showed that the HOA planned to purchase several properties around the neighborhood, including Margaret's. But there was something unusual. The purchase price listed for the properties was extremely low, much lower than the real market value. Daniel checked the estimated value of Margaret's home. Almost $600,000. But the HOA documents showed they planned to acquire it for less than $200,000. Daniel understood everything. Karen wasn't destroying the garden because it looked bad. She was destroying it because the garden was protecting the property value. A beautiful, historic garden made Margaret's house more desirable. But if Karen could make the property appear damaged, if she could create violations, if she could pressure Margaret into selling, she could buy the home cheaply. Then she could resell it through her development company for a massive profit. Daniel looked at his grandmother sleeping peacefully on the couch. She had spent her entire life building that home. And someone was trying to steal it piece by piece. The next morning, Daniel went to the HOA office. Karen was sitting behind a large desk. She didn't even look surprised. I knew you would come here. Daniel placed a folder on the desk. You knew. Karen smiled. People like you always think they can expose something bigger than themselves. Daniel opened the folder, then explained these payments. Karen looked down. For the first time, her confidence weakened. What are you talking about? Shell companies, fake contractors, missing HOA funds. Karen laughed. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. Daniel pushed the documents closer. It's evidence. Karen's face became cold. You should be careful with words like that. Why? Because people who make accusations without understanding the situation often regret it. Daniel stood up. My grandmother didn't deserve what you did. Karen leaned forward. Your grandmother is old, Daniel. She needs someone to make decisions for her. Daniel stared at her. You don't want to help her. Karen smiled. You're finally understanding. She was an obstacle. The room became silent. Daniel slowly reached into his pocket. His phone was recording. You just admitted you targeted her. Karen's eyes changed. A moment of panic. Then anger. You think that little recording matters. Daniel said nothing. Karen stood up. You don't know how this neighborhood works. She walked closer. I built this HOA. I control the board. I control the contractors. I control the paperwork. Then she whispered. And everyone eventually learns that fighting me is a mistake. Daniel left without another word. But inside he knew something. Karen had just revealed her biggest weakness. She believed she was untouchable. And people who believe they are untouchable always make mistakes. That afternoon, Daniel called a lawyer. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She specialized in homeowner disputes and financial fraud cases. After reviewing the documents, Sarah became serious. This is much bigger than a garden dispute. That's what I thought. Sarah looked through the records. If these documents are authentic, Karen could be facing fraud charges. Daniel nodded. But we need more. What more? Proof that connects everything. Sarah explained. Financial records show money disappeared, but we need to prove Karen personally benefited. Daniel remembered something. The development company. What about it? Karen's company is buying the properties after the HOA pressures homeowners. Sarah looked interested. Can you prove that? Daniel nodded. I think so. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't sitting quietly. She knew Daniel was dangerous. So she decided to attack first. The next day, Margaret received an official letter. A violation notice. But this time, it wasn't about the garden. It was about her house. According to the HOA, her property had multiple violations. Roof condition, exterior appearance, unauthorized modifications. Margaret stared at the paper. They're trying to remove me. Daniel grabbed the letter. This is retaliation. They want you scared. Margaret looked tired. Maybe I should just leave. Daniel immediately looked at her. No. Daniel. No, Grandma. He held her hand. This house is not just a building. It's your life. They want you to believe you're powerless. But they made one mistake. Margaret looked at him. What mistake? They hurt someone who had people willing to fight for her. For the first time in weeks, Margaret smiled. 3 days later, Daniel discovered something hidden in old HOA meeting records. A document from 5 years earlier. A document Karen never wanted anyone to see. It was a complaint. A complaint filed by another homeowner. The complaint claimed Karen had pressured elderly residents into selling their homes. Daniel froze. There were names attached. 7 homeowners, all elderly. All sold their houses below market value. And all properties were later purchased by companies connected to Karen. Daniel whispered, "She has done this before." Sarah looked at the records. "This changes everything." "Why?" "Because now we can prove a pattern." Daniel looked at the list. Margaret wasn't the first victim. She was just the first person who fought back. The next HOA meeting became the most important night in Willow Creek history. Karen walked into the community center, expecting another easy victory. She had controlled every meeting for years. Residents usually stayed quiet. Nobody challenged her. But this time was different. Margaret walked in. Daniel walked beside her. And behind them, dozens of homeowners followed. Karen looked around, confused. "What is this?" Daniel smiled. "This is your HOA meeting." Karen laughed. "You think bringing people here changes anything?" Sarah stepped forward. "No. What changes everything is what we brought with us." She placed a large folder on the table. Financial records, contracts, property transfers, evidence. Karen's expression changed. For the first time, she looked afraid. Daniel placed the final folder on the table. The room was completely silent. Everyone in Willow Creek Estates was watching Karen Whitmore. The same woman who had controlled every decision. The same woman who had made neighbors afraid to speak. The same woman who destroyed Margaret's garden without feeling a single moment of regret. But now, she was sitting across from a mountain of evidence. Sarah opened the folder. "Before we begin, I want everyone here to understand something. This is not about a garden." She looked around the room. "This is about power. This is about someone using an organization created to protect homeowners as a tool to exploit them." Karen immediately stood up. "This is ridiculous." Nobody moved. Sarah continued. "Over the last 5 years, HOA funds were transferred to multiple companies with no legitimate operations." She held up a document. "These companies received hundreds of thousands of dollars." Karen crossed her arms. "Those were approved community projects." Sarah nodded. "Interesting." She placed another document down. "Because every single one of those companies is connected to you." A few homeowners gasped. Karen looked around. "Don't believe everything you hear." Daniel stepped forward. "Then explain this." He placed a property record on the table. A property that belonged to an elderly couple who had lived in Willow Creek for 25 years. They received violation notices. They were threatened with fines. They were pressured into selling. Daniel looked directly at Karen. "And 3 months later, your development company purchased their home." Karen's face became tense. "That proves nothing." Sarah smiled. "Actually, it proves everything." She turned on the projector. A timeline appeared. 7 homeowners. 7 properties. 7 similar situations. Violation notices. Pressure. Forced sales. Then resale through Karen's companies. The room became filled with whispers. People looked at Karen differently. Not with fear anymore. With anger. Margaret sat quietly in the front row. She looked at the empty space outside where her garden used to be. She remembered the day Karen destroyed everything. The bulldozer. The broken flowers. The feeling of helplessness. But now, Karen was the one who looked helpless. Karen tried one final move. She laughed. You people think you understand business. Nobody answered. You think running an HOA is easy. She pointed toward the residents. You all wanted someone to make decisions, someone willing to enforce rules. Then she pointed at Margaret. And now you're angry because someone finally did. Margaret slowly stood up. The room became quiet. For years she had avoided conflict. She had always been the person who forgave, the person who stayed silent. But not today. Karen. Karen looked at her. Margaret continued. You keep saying you were doing your job. She walked closer. But your job was never to destroy people. It was never to make elderly homeowners afraid. It was never to steal what people spent their entire lives building. Karen looked away. Margaret's voice became stronger. My garden was not just flowers. It was the last thing my husband and I created together. You destroyed it because you thought it had no value. She paused. But you were wrong. Everyone watched. Because the value was never in the flowers. The value was in the memories. And you can destroy flowers. But you cannot destroy the truth. The room went silent. 2 weeks later, investigators arrived at Willow Creek Estates. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Financial records were examined. Contracts were reviewed. Property transactions were investigated. Karen's entire operation began falling apart. The companies she created disappeared one by one. The money trail became clear. She had been moving HOA funds through fake contractors and using the profits to buy properties from vulnerable homeowners. The garden demolition was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger plan. A plan that had worked for years because nobody dared challenge her. Until Margaret. Karen eventually faced legal consequences. The HOA board members who helped hide the financial records also resigned. The residents voted for a completely new board. For the first time in years, people felt like they actually owned their neighborhood again. Not Karen. Not the HOA. The homeowners. 3 months later, something special happened. Margaret woke up early like she always did. She walked outside with her coffee. But this time, she stopped. Because where her destroyed garden once stood, something beautiful had returned. Flowers, roses, trees, her garden. But it was different. The entire neighborhood had helped rebuild it. The children who used to walk past her house planted flowers. The neighbors who stayed silent for years brought decorations. Even people who had never spoken to Margaret before came to help. Daniel stood beside her. I thought you might like it. Margaret looked around. Tears filled her eyes. I don't understand. Daniel smiled. You spent 30 years making this place beautiful. People finally realized they should have protected it. Margaret touched one of the new rose bushes. A small smile appeared. Your grandfather would have loved this. A few months later, the new HOA held a community meeting. But this time, it wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about controlling people. It was about rebuilding trust. Margaret was invited to speak. She stood in front of everyone. I spent weeks wondering why someone would destroy something so harmless. I kept asking myself, why my garden? She looked around. Now I understand. Sometimes people destroy things because they only see what they can gain. They don't see what something means to someone else. She paused. My garden was never valuable because of the flowers. It was valuable because it represented kindness, memories, and love. And those are things no person can steal. Everyone applauded. Later that evening, Daniel and Margaret sat outside the new garden. The sunset covered the neighborhood in warm light. Daniel looked at his grandmother. "You know something." "What?" "You won." Margaret smiled. "No." Daniel looked confused. "No." She shook her head. "Karen lost." "But winning." She looked at the flowers. "Winning was making sure nobody else had to go through what I went through." Daniel smiled, because he finally understood. Revenge was never about hurting someone back. Real revenge was exposing the truth. And Karen Whitmore had spent years building a wall of lies. But one destroyed garden, one determined grandson, and one elderly woman who refused to stay silent brought the entire wall crashing down. And in the place where anger once grew, a garden grew again. A garden that reminded everyone in Willow Creek Estates of one simple truth. Power can silence people for a while. Money can hide secrets for years. But eventually, the truth finds a way to grow.